With the Akatsuki being one of anime's most notorious villain organizations ever, popularity and misconceptions are equally ever present. So today I'm going to break down everything we know that we didn't see about the Akatsuki timeline, concerning their recruitments, Jinchuriki fights, and even other missions, using only the canon material. As stated in Databook 3, the various rogue shinobi of Akatsuki each join with their own expectations. However, despite that and their ability to battle 1,000 men at once, they fully obey Pain and treat his word as absolute, as he also makes plain his desire to redeem the shinobi world. As the members are each sought out by the Akatsuki, they are wanted for heinous crimes, including a daimyo killing, Kazekage assassinations, bomb terrorism, Hokage assassination attempts, and a slaughter of an Uchiha clan. They always operate in two-man cells, and each member has a quota of one tailed beast to capture. It's their leader's belief that when two members team up, even a tailed beast or Jinchuriki will have no chance against them. So, he has recruited members with unique specialties such as human puppetry and clay bombs. It's safe to further speculate that the advantage of joining such an S-rank monstrously powerful organization working in unison is exactly that. So that their chance of being captured by a nation of which they are wanted is dwindled severely, with characters like even the legendary Sannin Jiraiya having trouble gathering information on this group. Starting a reformation is its true claim. That is the reason for accumulating money, for creating an organization that'll accept money for contracts of war. By crushing the hidden villages in each nation, they hope to gain a monopoly and control all wars, so they might finally put an end to all war. Now, while it thus would then make sense for why someone like Deidara, for example, would then benefit greatly from this organization, seeing as he would have borderline national security level protection now over his head, so long as he, for a time, redirects his purpose. In fact, as the Itachi Shinen Midnight novel comes to a close, Obito tells Itachi that after having slaughtered the entire Uchiha clan, he could use some protection. With this novel also informing us that by the time Itachi joins, Orochimaru was already in, and alongside Obito, they head to the Akatsuki's primary base in Amegakure. In canonically determining the chronological order of when each member joined, it gets quite complicated. Obviously, the group had started first and foremost with Pain and hence Konan. Orochimaru was a serious criminal who performed forbidden experiments on people who joined the Akatsuki after having been chased out of the village by the third Hokage. Itachi joins after Orochimaru, and while people speculate that Kisame was recruited as one of the earliest members, this isn't actually known, as Obito's request isn't given from a particular time frame, and we know that Kisame is seemingly implied to be brought into the organization after Itachi as a means to be his partner. Perhaps you could say the reason for Obito having warned the earlier non-Akatsuki Robun he met Kisame was for the purpose that it's right after he made the deal that Itachi will join the Akatsuki. Kisame also seems to join the Akatsuki not long after killing his mentor Fukuki, as previously Kisame has worn a thinner sword strap and only took the thicker tan-colored one and Samehada after killing him, and his headband style also changes from when he killed his comrades till then, matching the later one from the Akatsuki. Regardless, when Kisame joins, Itachi is already there, which also means that we can be sure that Sasori and Orochimaru were also there, as the birthday columns affirm not only their partnership, but also that Orochimaru was in the Akatsuki primarily for the purpose of Itachi's body. Kakuzu is also implied to have been an older member, although having, quote, slaughtered every partner he had and cut their hearts, turning the hearts of his butchered partners into masks too, which would confirm previous members we never knew being related to Kakuzu, and I'll touch on this maybe a little bit later, and his earlier entry would also make sense for him being trusted holistically with the Akatsuki's financial needs. After having forced Orochimaru out of the Akatsuki, Sasori was left without a partner, so, either by order or choice, Itachi and his now partner Kisame would go and aid Sasori in recruiting his new partner, a bomb terrorist from Iwagakure, Deidara, who is, by this point, actually implied by his birthday column to have been gaining a reputational attraction. As Kakuzu was progressively killing his partners, the Akatsuki High Command set their sights on one who can't be killed, Hidan, who we know to be the last member, as does not only his birthday column state he had been recently recruited by the Akatsuki, but also in the Chapter 328 meeting, Hidan himself states, "I'm the second newest member after Tobi." Now, this is also forcing me into answering a really important point for Itachi and his partnerships, being, was he ever actually partnered with Juzo Biwa? No, probably not, for the primary reason that it just doesn't fit with the canonical recruitments. However, since he does have like only one panel in the manga, we could look to his 4 databook mini file on him, which states, Biwa Juzo, age 31 at death, was a former member of the 7 Ninja Swordsmen. Wielding the Executioner's Blade, he drenched battlefields in blood, and his merciless brutality became infamous across many nations, which does imply that he certainly could have been recognized by the Akatsuki and possibly brought in. However, it just doesn't fit. Fanbook 1 also states that the Executioner's Blade is only used by Zabuza. However, if you're wanting to be skeptical, you could argue that within the confines of Fanbook 1, and thus the Akatsuki are barely just even a concept by that point. At some point, they all had been recruited, likely within this time frame, and Sasori and his partner Deidara had just finished destroying a village under orders from the Akatsuki. Deidara blew up the village's buildings with his explosive clay, and Sasori killed the survivors from within using his Hiriko puppet. Sasori wanted to immediately report the mission's success back to the Akatsuki. However, Deidara was focused on finding some higher quality clay that he could use, as since Sasori wanted to avoid Tsunegakure still being an S-class traitor to the nation, they had instead approached the nation from the nearby land of rivers. During the initial flyover though, Deidara could then see all these ceramics that decorated the buildings and the active chimneys used in their creation, which he wanted at the time. While looking for the source of the village's clay, Sasori and Deidara were careful to avoid drawing attention to themselves. As such, they only killed in moderation. Deidara was hopeful that the clay would be enough for him to kill Orochimaru, who he blamed for his recruitment into Akatsuki. Had Orochimaru never defected, Deidara would have never been forced to join, but on finally finding the mine where the village collected its clay, Deidara was unimpressed, deeming it inferior to the clay he had been already using. Then, the partners eventually located a workshop deep within the mansion which Sasori had previously denoted to be the village leaders. Deidara then made a spider using the clay he found there and was immediately impressed by it, and it was much closer to a representation of his true artistic vision than the one that he had also been trying previously. He tried to show it to Sasori, but Sasori was preoccupied studying the secrets of the ceramic glazes that were also stored in the workshop, as it was for this reason that Sasori agreed to come to the ceramic village in the first place, as these glazes could possibly expand his vast knowledge of poisons even more, showing how Sasori is trying to ever expand his pinnacle level poisons, which even Chiyo notes as a clear distinction from when he earned his moniker Sasori of the Red Sand. However, meanwhile, in the Land of Fire, Konoha's might and pride has been struck to half by the once promising shinobi and Sannin, now turned to the most evil and powerful of all village enemies, Orochimaru. We see as the tears of the third Hokage's death begin to dry up, 2 monsters have made their appearance known in Konoha. Itachi Uchiha of the Sharingan, who murdered the entire clan in a single night, and his partner, Kisame Hoshigaki, the Scourge of Kirigakure, responsible for daimyo and 7 ninja swordsmen killings. Itachi takes the fight to Kakashi, the strongest Jonin in the village, and makes sport of him alongside 2 other Jonin comrades, according to Databook 2. What are they after? Naruto Uzumaki, the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki. But perhaps the true goal of Itachi here isn't Naruto, but Sasuke, to ensure that Danzo and the elders know he's still very much alive and very much a threat. And after fighting more with these and even the legendary Sannin Jiraiya, Itachi and Kisame retreat and go silent for 2 years. Or so that's what we thought, according to the 10th Mini Chronicle Guide, in that about 2 years after the fierce battle at the Valley of the End, the organization Akatsuki, which had remained silent, finally makes its move. And that, from what we know, it is comprised entirely of elite fighters with unique abilities aiming to reshape the world through the power of Tailed Beast. But before Deidara's conquering of Tsunegakure on the world stage that would plunge Tsunegakure into a state of emergency, to other members they were silently making their move. Presumably having to stay silent, the Akatsuki send one of their most trusted members to fulfill his quota first, Kakuzu, who set his sights not on one of the 5 great nations or villages, but Takigakure, his home, the village hidden in the waterfall where the famed 7 Tails Chiome is located. And while the encounter is largely unknown, other than the fact that Chome is the only bijou that could have been captured besides one other during this time skip, Kakuzu presumably infiltrates his once-loved village, which exiled him for his failure to assassinate Hashirama, the first Hokage, likely out of loyalty to the organization or out of financial promise to pay him. As we know, his contract with the Akatsuki is one of mutual interest, according to Databook 3, showing how he really would be the perfect fit for a silent Takigakure infiltration of the Seven Tails, which wouldn't even require a border entry of any of the 5 great nations. We know nothing about this fight, just that it happened and that Kakuzu likely wasn't alone. However, whether this was with Hidan or a former partner, we don't actually know, although Hidan is the more likely, which I'll get into later with the statement Hidan makes. And instead of fixating upon this, returning back west to Amegakure, as the Iron Curtain has long descended across the nation, the leader of Amegakure seeks for a toppling of a monarch whose name was known and feared by every shinobi on the planet. There were truly no shinobi who didn't know the name Hanzo the Salamander. And while the world only knows briefly of a factional civil war in Amegakure, so too we don't know much about this conflict or its time frame, just that in part 2, it's implied to have concluded very recently, where Hanzo's once loyal Amegakure shinobi were sneaking into Amegakure to hopefully kill Pain, to get revenge on Pain for murdering Hanzo to the Salamander in cold blood, killing him and every known distant relative to the once mighty leader, ending the war. But as the self-proclaimed god took control of the nation, the world remained ignorant. To them, he was no one. To Amegakure, Lord Pain is a legend because he defeated all of Amegakure by himself. Pain began to even control the weather, making it rain with his ninjutsu that he can control every single droplet and intruder who dared to enter his home, the Akatsuki's home. Elsewhere, over the course of a few days, Hidan and Kakuzu were wandering through the Valley of Lies, looking for a man with a 1.5 billion ryo bounty on his head. And since they'd been wandering for days, Hidan's god, Jashin, imputed unrighteousness to his previously beloved servant, as Hidan was incapable of having anybody to kill and sacrifice. And just as Hidan began angrily pleading to leave, a man emerged from nearby trees, who Kakuzu recognized as the man with the bounty they were looking for. Finally, having somebody to kill, Hidan chases him down using his triple-bladed scythe to get a sample of the man's blood. The man then began to perform hand seals to counterattack, but stopped whenever he saw Hidan cutting open his own hand, and he watched in confusion as Hidan prepared his curse technique. Hidan drawing Jashin's symbol on the ground and licking the man's blood from the scythe, the skeleton pattern then appeared on his skin, and finally stabbing himself in the heart, Hidan's ritual was completed. The man coughed up blood and died. Hidan immediately began performing a ritual to Jashin, but was interrupted by the appearance of a young boy with muddy hands, who watched the fight and was now curious of how Hidan's ability actually worked. Hidan began to then educate the boy on the religion. The boy then answered Kakuzu's remarks, saying that the man was probably from the same village as him, but which they had missed because it was basically covered in a genjutsu, hence why it's called the Village of Lies. The boy then questioned Hidan's commandment of kill thy neighbor, asking why doesn't he just kill Kakuzu, and Hidan just comedically tells the boy that he hates Kakuzu and would never consider Kakuzu a neighbor. And while this was happening, Kakuzu began to hypothesize that perhaps each man was shielded like the other and was truly a bounty. And his theory was proved correct, as they had destroyed the village and every single one in it had a bounty on their head. Concurrently, as rain continually drenches the streets of Amegakure after the recent overthrow of Hanzo the Salamander, the masked man, known to them as Madara, had come to give Pain some crucial information. Madara told Konan and Nagato about a man in the Valley of Lies that supposedly had information on the tailed beast. Nagato pointed out that Hidan and Kakuzu had recently destroyed the village there, but Madara explained that the informant fled to safety right before the village's destruction. Because the informant was once a ninja of Iwagakure, it's possible he knew something about Iwa's Jinchuriki, the Five Tails, as the organization was seeking for any and all information on the Five Tails Jinchuriki, whose whereabouts were now seemingly pretty hard to find. Because of the secrecy surrounding Jinchuriki's identities, it was important that the Akatsuki attain any information they could in order to accomplish their goals. Madara was adamant on Konan being the one to seek out the informant. Konan protested as she had duties in Ame, but also needed to stay with Nagato. She suggested sending Hidan and Kakuzu since they had just been there, but Madara replied that they were already out on a new mission, and that Zetsu would accompany her path to the location. For a large portion of the trip, Konan had been reflecting heavily on her past, wishing that she would have died on that very day, so that maybe, in another life, Yahiko and Nagato would have reunited with Jiraiya, their former sensei, like they had planned. To Konan, she had truly believed that Nagato had also died that day, in a sense. Where he was once kind and sensitive, he became ruthless and uncompromising. He was willing to work with Madara, who distorted and twisted the Akatsuki into the opposite of what Yahiko would have ever wanted. After the mission was a success, she had returned to Amegakure, and Madara was surprised, hoping that she would die, so that Nagato's hatred may in fact make him even more monstrous, where deep within Konan's heart, she too began to hate Madara and began wishing for his death. This is likely where Konan would begin researching the masked man's illusory abilities so that she may kill him. However, after 2 years of silence, the Akatsuki realized the world stage is set, and for the next quota, it needs to be fulfilled. A great nation must be invaded, and quickly. So, due to its southwestern position cornering the great nations, clad in black cloaks adorned with red clouds, Deidara infiltrates the sand village from the sky, and the Kazekage intercepts him. Deidara swiftly infiltrated and murdered the Kazekage, who was also the One-Tails Jinchuriki. Sometime around this point, Kakuzu and more recently and importantly Hidan is entrusted to capture the Two-Tails Jinchuriki of Kumogakure. We know that upon the sealing of the One-Tails, 2 eyes of the Geto Mazo are already open, and thus 2 of the Bijou have been sealed prior to Gar's One-Tails. We've discussed Fu's 7 tails already, however, I'll speculate upon the other one more later. In this meeting, we see a shadowy figure remarking that he will go fight my guy, a highly skilled Jonin and Taijutsu expert according to Itachi, with the figure's reasoning being that he's frustrated about not finding his Jinchuriki sooner. Now, this is in chapter 255, and Hidan and Kakuzu's first appearance is in chapter 312. However, there are 2 shadowy figures at this 255 One-Tails meeting, and the aforementioned one has to be Hidan, because every other member is ruled out unless you think that neither Kakuzu nor Hidan were in the Akatsuki until after this and 2 members simultaneously died. However, with the Akatsuki's constant frustration about losing Orochimaru and the events we know from Akatsuki Hidan, this is highly unlikely, if not basically impossible, meaning that this figure is Hidan, which the colored manga also agrees with in coloring his eyes purple, and this other mask figure is Kakuzu, who just changed his mask style. Many argue this can't be Kakuzu as he's not taller than Kisame's listed height. However, weirdly enough, they are constantly drawn like this. Take volume 41's cover as an example of this. So yes, they changed their mask and hairstyle over this chapter range. However, Hidan's frustration about not finding his Jinchuriki, Kumogakure's Two-Tails, would soon be soothed as he and Kakuzu's first appearance would find her hiding in the very outskirts of the Land of Lightning. Judging by the repetitive windowless and highly concrete-based architecture, and even its location, this is probably an abandoned, higher-level detention center or prison, which also fits with its surroundings being far removed from civilization in a highly fortified rock environment. Yugito, however, traps the 2 Akatsuki members in, and Hidan states that Kakuzu is usually the doer, which does lead me to believe that Hidan was with Kakuzu when the 7 Tails was captured, and perhaps another time. However, the reason I'm not fully convinced of this 100% is that Hidan is lying constantly throughout this scene. Fitting with her escape from them over time, Hidan lures her into thinking she's got a victory in her grasp. He bluffs that my attack speed is the slowest and my aim the worst among the Akatsuki, so I probably can't even hit you anyway. And we know the latter of the 2 is demonstrably false, striking just Asaba's cheek while doing a backflip upside down while dodging Shikamaru's shadow paralysis, and he can even use his cord to bounce kunai off it casually. Plus, we know that Kakuzu isn't the slowest member, and Hidan is nigh equals with him in basically every single possible instance, which I go over in this video if you want more for that. However, despite telling all of this supposed uncertainty to Yugito, he praises Ritual, with the birthday columns confirming that this is Hidan's pre-murder prayer, showing how outwardly he doesn't think he can win, and inwardly, he knows he's going to kill her in a matter of minutes. With Hidan later even laughing about him being a trapped mouse. Kakuzu tells Hidan, if it couldn't be more obvious, just be careful Hidan, or you'll die. Who gets serious whenever Hidan starts yapping, who then confirms to us his inner thoughts, and he doesn't want to leave her alive because he's going to totally slaughter her. Later, against Asuma, Izumo, and Katetsu and Shikamaru, Kakuzu tells him again, just be careful Hidan, or you'll die. Where Hidan this time doesn't want to do that strategy and tells him, will you quit it already? I wish someone would just kill me already. As Hidan finally has his quota sealed completely by the Geto Mazo, both he and Kakuzu set their sights on Konagakure's Nine Tails. However, in theory this would break the quota, meaning that I suppose you could be hyper skeptical and say, well, this means that Kakuzu didn't capture the Seven Tails, but this is probably wrong, as these are kind of loosely floated about anyway, as Itachi would have gotten 2 and so too Kisame, so Kakuzu and Hidan searching for such isn't outlandish, just that the quota is probably a minimum and not maximum based quota. For example, when Sasuke later fails the assignment of Kumogakure's 8 Tails Killer B, the assignment is pretty quickly just passed on to Kisame. However, in dialing the clock back, after Sasori had died in battle with Sakura and Chiyo, his ring symbolizing the one who stands above the others, or perhaps, what we might say, the master of puppets, is passed on to Tobi, befitting his true identity. But just before Kakuzu and Hidan had murdered Asuma, Deidara is assigned to the Three Tails Wandering Bijou, Isobu, who he and his new partner find more than likely off the shores of Kirigakure's islands. Deidara quickly dismisses its formidability with his C2 bombs, and he pulls the near-lifeless Bijou back to the Akatsuki hideout, with the anime showing Tobi then lying on Isobu's belly, possibly reminiscent of his old life, his old love. For record, though we aren't entirely sure, as even Sasori himself doesn't fully know, this was probably his assigned Bijou, which was passed on to Tobi as the replacement, again showing how loosely floated the Jinchuriki capture ideas are. However, as time follows, the mighty Hidan and Kakuzu, my personal favorite duo for their humor and natural dynamic, fall at the hands of not just Kakashi and Team 10, but the slowly evolving Nine Tails Jinchuriki, Naruto Uzumaki, who is then set into the crosshairs of the Akatsuki's assassin, Deidara, or at least he was, till Deidara then decided that Sasuke Uchiha was the prey he wanted most, to perhaps redeem himself from his own self-perceived failures against Itachi when he joined the Akatsuki. However, just before that, we cut away to Itachi and Kisame, where the latter was capturing Iwagakure's 4 Tails Jinchuriki Roshi, with him even insisting on going in alone. The two then throw around the idea of Itachi still needing to capture his assignment, which is Naruto's Nine Tails. However, this may speak to a large mystery later. Deidara, having come from Iwagakure, the stone village, was so used to rocks and stones, which would build up and remain stagnant for a long part of history. And tired of his life, Deidara, having been a shinobi of Iwagakure, who has won high praise as a clay sculptor, with the Kizuna Heaven Scroll backing up by stating he was not only an exceptional shinobi of Akatsuki, but also a once accomplished clay sculptor of Iwagakure. Thus, even in battle, he carried with him his own unique aesthetic. In the fleeting flash of an instant, Deidara sought self-expression as he detonated his explosive clay, erasing his enemies. This all-or-nothing explosion was the supreme art that he loved. He loved art so much that he stole Iwagakure's forbidden jutsu that allows him to fold chakra into his creations. So, having been completely humiliated in a flash by Itachi's genjutsu, this battle is one between conviction and death. And after a long and hard-fought battle, Deidara died, losing to the Sharingan, but, as Databook 3 states, Deidara detonates himself, and this was not only to surpass the Uchiha as a shinobi, but an artist's final work. His ultimate work of art is also the personification of death. In an instant, loss of all that, his dreams, passions, and personhood all given up for the sake of his magnum opus. The Akatsuki then regroup to inform the death of, and mourn, Deidara. Kisame then seemingly is actually concerned that another one of these stronger members has died, where Itachi has to step outside of his classified location to stare up at the cold rain, perhaps as a means to hide his tears of the tragedy of his life. And Kisame seemingly cares for Itachi, suggesting that he comes back inside to avoid catching an illness. Itachi then uses a clone to meet Naruto to entrust himself a power of hope for the future, and to Sasuke a sign that the end is near, where Itachi would, to put it plainly, die for the sake of his brother. The Akatsuki would then have another Jinchuriki prior to the 8 Tails fall, being Kirigakure's 6 Tails Jinchuriki Utakata, which the anime details in full, showing all 6 paths maliciously approaching him in the woods, where he fought them off briefly, catching them largely off guard with a few moves they couldn't really predict, until ultimately the divine hand was held high over Utakata's corpse. However, upon learning of the devastating truth of his dear brother, Sasuke too, through a means of rage and frustration, joins the Akatsuki and is assigned to the Eight Tails, to which he pursues in hunting down Killer Bee in a training ground of Kumogakure. Sasuke was already quite physically affected, as not only had he lost Orochimaru's curse mark, but was also still recovering from his battle with his little brother. After a long, hard-fought fight, Sasuke and Team Taka had defeated Killer Bee, or so they thought. With all this being said, you'll notice that I've explained and noted every canonical Bijou assignment and capture therein. However, if you paid close attention, you'll notice that there's one Bijou who is captured in the time skip that I didn't mention. This being Iwagakure's Five Tails, Han. We have no idea who captured Han. It's actually quite complicated to determine this. Now, we know about the time frame which it happened, being not long after Konan had pursued the informant who had the information concerning his whereabouts. So here's a recap of all the assignments, just so you have some context going in. Takigakure's Seven Tails was Kakuzu. Iwagakure's Five Tails is unknown. Tsunegakure's One Tails was Deidara. Kirigakure's Three Tails was Deidara, although it was Sasori's assignment, likely. Kumogakure's Two Tails was Hidan. Iwagakure's Four Tails was Kisame. Kirigakure's Six Tails was Pain. Kumogakure's Eight Tails was Sasuke, though possibly assigned to Sasori. And Konohagakure's Nine Tails was Pain, though likely assigned to Itachi. Meaning that you'll notice, determining who captured Han is going to require a duplicate for the most part. There are a few characters to consider, and I'll give the reasons for why it's likely or not so likely. The first is Deidara. We know that Deidara has shown time and time again that he's a monster at Bijou capture, and he's hungry for it. He even later in the war wants to take on the 9 and 8 Tails Jinchuriki at the same time, where even here previously he takes on Tobi's assignment for him. However, Sasori states that he shouldn't go after Naruto because he'd already be pushing his quota of one Bijou, which implies that Gaara was his first. Next is Sasori, who I think is unlikely, as they are leaving Tsunegakure. He states that he hasn't gotten his Jinchuriki yet, and also says he doesn't even know anything about it. Next is Itachi. However, his assignment is stated to be the Nine Tails. Kisame's assignment is Roshi, but perhaps since he claims to be the best at Bijou capture, this could imply that by the time he fights B, he may have more than one experience, making him a possible candidate. Kakuzu is, in my opinion, probably the most defensible case, as we know that Hidan states that Kakuzu is usually the doer, implying a precedent for a likelihood which would probably include more than just one Bijou in the previous capture of the Seven Tails. Konan is another likely one, and while we have no idea if she was even assigned one, she did go after Han's informant just prior to him being killed and captured, so she could have been assigned one, and if she was, it most likely would have been Han. Now, to further this possibility, you could say that with the informant hunt concerning Konan was proposed to do it, but requested that Kakuzu do it, which could have also happened here in this case. And the last possibility is Orochimaru, as we know that the Akatsuki are extremely devastated by his loss, so perhaps his contribution was taking in Han. However, this is most likely speculative and just a case similar to Konan in that it's a possibility, not because of their probability, but rather the other members' lack thereof. I could also go into a few other very large events that are largely known by you guys that happened after this point. The two biggest key ones being Pain's death in Konoha and Ana's transformation to Naruto, and the other being Konan finally fulfilling her plan to kill Obito, her plan to take down this Akatsuki that was fully contrary to everything Yahiko would have ever wanted, showing how in the hopes and in the name of the real Akatsuki, Konan would take on this one, this manipulated, twisted illusion of what the Akatsuki was supposed to be, ultimately trying to kill Obito, but giving her life, and being just like Nagato as the middle volume. And of course, some of the Akatsuki members get reanimated later for a few purposes, but that's not so important because you guys already know most of the plot there. If you guys would like another video of explaining a timeline of another thing or explaining more about what we don't know, then let me know what exactly you'd want to see in the comments below, as I've also done this video for every Shinobi War, going over basically every single thing there is to know about them, including the political motives, who won, why they started, how long they lasted, etc. So if you enjoyed this, then check out that, and also I have a few other things like this, such as icebergs, which you'd probably enjoy, but more importantly, may God bless you all, Love you guys.